Hi, Katie.
Hello.
So good to have you here. I looked at your LinkedIn and you've had such an impressive career. The milestones are, it's just fascinating the amount of things you've done. And you are exactly the right person for me to ask a bunch of questions to. So, how do you feel about that?
I'm excited to dive in. I'm an open book, so let's see what comes of it.
Okay, awesome. So, obviously, like we were talking about your LinkedIn, you've held several titles, you've dealt with different kinds of people. I want to understand, how has your life before doing any of those things shaped the way you look at people?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, before I started my career, right, I went to school for early childhood education. So there's a lot of psychology kind of baked into that helped inform my, opinions of how others may be feeling and, how to address those situations in the best way possible. So I think that really helped. I also think there is this sort of, in getting my education degree, I do think that there are transferable skills there that have, kind of led me into sales development leadership and, being able to educate in a more effective way there. And then after I got my degree, or kind of in the middle of that process, I was a bartender. And I think that experience has also helped a lot. I understood quickly what got me more tips, remembering someone's order, remembering what they told you about a small detail of their life and bringing it up later. And so I think that, that's really where my people skills were perhaps unlocked. And then finally, I think even before that, right? I had parents that were very empathetic to others and were always constantly serving the community. And so I think that has also kind of shaped me into the person that I am today. And when we think about sales and even marketing, right? It's all about just deeply understanding the person and what matters to them and figuring out a way to make their life easier. And so I think the combination of all those things has kind of led me to this career choice and, doing something that ultimately I'm really passionate about. So,
That's an awesome background, to be honest with you. Like, really, a lot of people don't have that. I myself had a very technical background coming into marketing. Then had to really like hone my skills in understanding people. Like natural curiosity aside, technically was what my background was in. So it's really like a skill to have that you don't have to really develop, but it's sort of like in you. Is
yeah.
there, yeah, is there anything that you've believed about building relationships throughout your childhood that when you stepped into sales and became a leader, you were completely like proven wrong about?
Gosh, I think it's more so, you know, when I started stepping into leadership roles, right? I was very emotional, right? I treated people with empathy and I was always very, I guess sensitive to what they were going through. And as a result, that always served me well on that end. But I had to learn to separate, right, business and, the executive conversations from feelings. And of course you can have some emotion. You need to have some emotion when it comes to something that you deeply believe in. But I think that is something I learned throughout my career is like the separation of fact and feeling at certain points and being able to take criticism without having too much emotion involved. That's something that as a child, I always, when I got criticism, maybe I was on a swim team or something and got criticism. Of course, I took it personally and that drove me to do better. But in business, you have to learn to separate the two. Slightly. And so I think I've gotten a lot better about that. Of course, I think these soft skills like empathetic thinking and all of that are even more important in today's AI world, right? Because we have AI taking care of all of these manual tasks, etc. And I truly do believe that empathy is what sets humans apart, humans that are succeeding in today's day and age. But you have to take that with a grain of salt and know that you can only be so sensitive in a business setting and the world needs to keep turning and you need to be able to take that feedback without letting it chip your shoulder too much.
Yeah, that's very true. And also, sort of like, when I think about that from a lens of sales and business and marketing, whatever it is that we're all working towards, like achieving a certain goal, And no matter what is happening in your personal life or whatever is happening, politics or whatever is happening internally in a company, you still have to meet those goals. It doesn't matter what the circumstances are, which to me is like leading to a question of like, when in B2B, you have buyers, you have salespeople, you have marketing, there's like huge amount of people involved in making one single decision of like, do we sign the dotted line or do we not?
Yeah.
So when you look at these buying committees, whether it's B2B, B2C, people have different terms. It's at the end of the day, it's just like me selling something to you and you being willing to buy it or not. And there are so many emotions tied to that. It could be your own career growth. It could be your own fear of looking stupid in front of your team. So in your experience, how many times have you seen something like that, something like an emotion that has been a hindrance to closing a deal?
I think buying is an extremely emotional experience, right? And I think the most important thing that you can do, and I've seen it time and time again, right? Because your buyers, when they are buying a software, it is not an inexpensive decision to make, right? And it can feel like it will make the difference between you having your job and not, right? The success of the softwares that you are making best bets on, right? So it is highly emotional, and it is incredibly important as a seller to earn that trust and to really serve as this advisor to your buyers so that they feel super confident when it is time to sign on the dotted line, right? And I think if at any point you lose that trust, right? So you see this a lot in competitive deals, right? Where maybe your competitor is claiming that you actually can't do something and you have to regain that trust. If you miss a step in that process and you don't rebuild that effectively, then you can lose a deal. And we see it time and time again. I've seen it at a ton of different companies. I think people also like to buy from people that they like, right? And people that they've known before, or people that their friends have referred them to, because there's a deeper sense of trust there. So, if anyone ever insinuates that buying is not an emotional process, I think that they're completely inaccurate in that.
Yeah, I agree with you on 2 points. Like, one is trust. The second thing is, if a friend of yours has sort of like had a contract with another company or vendor, then you'd be more likely to choose them because you have a source. But I think
Right.
it's also interesting because it can work backwards for you. If you don't like a vendor, you can tell your friend that you don't like them. And then therefore, there's not going to be a data point for that vendor to know that this is the reason why you didn't opt to work with them.
Right, exactly. And it's interesting because nowadays, right, buying and doing your own research on a product is so easy. And so buyers they already have their short list by the time that they're even getting on a lot of our radars. And so it is so important to have a good reputation across this whole industry, because another thing that I think people are realizing more and more is that this industry, right, this B2B tech kind of world is a lot smaller than we think it is. And a lot more buyers are going to, intimate community groups, to Reddit, to all of these different places that are private and kind of off the beaten path, where they are getting their answers from their peers. So that trust is really important to normalize across the company and to really put effort into as you are speaking with different prospects. I think it's important.
How do you think we can build this trust? Because it's a word that we are all using right now, especially with AI. How
Yeah.
do you think, from your experience, one of the top 3 ways, if you will, to build trust for a company as a sales leader?
Yeah, so I think the top way that I have seen is thought leadership, right? And really getting your exec team involved in sharing their thoughts, the good, bad, the ugly, publicly. This is something that during my time at Sendoso, we've really started to prioritize. And when we did that, we noticed that people were really excited to listen. We see all of these posts from people that are talking about the wins all the time. I just got promoted. We just hit quota. But it's less often that you're seeing a leader, a VP, a C-suite talk about, we just ran a campaign and it failed. Here's why, and here's what we learned and won't do next time. That is a lot more actionable for people to take and ensure that they don't make the same mistakes moving forward. And so once we started posting content like that, we started getting in more rooms with more leaders because they valued what we had to bring to the table. And so it's a scary thing to do. But once we did it, we started realizing that we were driving real pipeline by just being more publicly accessible and by lending our thoughts to other leaders in the space. And so I think that that really helped to build trust and also relationships that really came, into the pipeline later on. And it actually became a huge channel for us and something that still to this day, Sendoso is prioritizing, which is great. And InFlu2 is doing that too. I think a lot of companies out there, whether it's podcasts like this, just straight LinkedIn posts, these very human methods of communication and just publicly telling your truth, I think are really, really powerful for that.
With this being, one of the things that is building trust, I can think about it backfiring in two different ways, which I've seen some leaders do, which is one, using ghostwriters, and two, being performatively admitting losses. That's like, I recently had this one opportunity and I turned it down, but here's what I learned about life from there. So it kind of becomes performative, even though it's really just about, I'm being honest and I'm telling you this is what I went through, but it can come across as being performative because people don't really see what's in it for me at the end of the day with thought leadership posts and also ghostwriting. So what are your thoughts on that? And that being, such an indicator of how you build trust.
Yeah, this is such a good point. So I do think, ghostwriters are interesting because I know a few really great ones that essentially will meet with an exec and they get the exec story in their words and they are simply hired to translate that story into something that is readable, scannable for LinkedIn, right? And so I think that those ghostwriters can be extremely effective. Now, when you talk about the ghostwriters that are completely don't sound like the leader or AI that is just, manufactured junk, that doesn't work. And people can sense the inauthenticity there. It is, you can see it and smell it from a mile away. Now, I think it is pretty easy at this point to distinguish between something that is a real feeling, a real emotion written by a real human. We have learned how to detect AI and, perhaps overly professional writing on LinkedIn. And so I think people can kind of make those determinations at this point. I do think if you are going to hire a ghostwriter, it's important to ensure that your voice is still infused within that story and that you're actually communicating with the ghostwriter so they can use your voice and just translate it to written text. But I do think AI doesn't really have a place when your goal is to build trust. It should be written by a human. And I think we're seeing more and more people focused on blogs and content that are still written by humans. I mean, Chelsea Castle is brilliant. And she actually wrote a post about this recently where, the way to win in content now is to ensure that it stays human because we have so many people who are, going back or going to AI so that they can maximize content. But the question there becomes, well, how much of that content is actually genuinely good? And I would bet that a lot of that content, if you were pushing for, quantity over quality, isn't that great. And, you're not getting that many organic readers that way.
That's so right. Because, right now it's about we have the ability to do things at scale because we have AI. But the problem with that is once you have more quantity, your quality goes down. I've actually seen this happen. I was on the procurement side looking for some tools for a platform that I was building. And obviously I get targeted emails, all these outreaches. But one thing I found really interesting was with the amount of data that we have at hand and the amount of intent signals, you can know my behavior. You Google me and you will know my career trajectory and probably what I'm worth. You could probably know a lot more about me if you just did some in-depth research. But I found it very interesting that I've been pitched deals that are way out of my budget and I'm not their prospect at all. And why would you reach out to me? Like, you have so much data, yet big companies still make the mistake of reaching out to folks that are literally not even in your line of sight. I'm not your customer at all, will never become your customer in the near future. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, the spray and pray is getting a bit ridiculous, in my opinion, with the access to AI and tools like Clay and Aiden to automate outbound. I mean, I sell contact level intent, so I know how powerful the signals are, but yet every day I have other intent players trying to pitch me. So I totally empathize with that. I think, that again is kind of, it goes hand in hand with what we just talked about with the content, right? It should be all about quality over quantity right now, because of course, as a buyer, I get hundreds of emails pitching me a day, tons of Slacks, or I'm sorry, tons of LinkedIn's, phone calls, etc. And I have learned to ignore most of those things. The only way to capture my attention these days is if you are sending me a voice note that's personalized on LinkedIn, a video that's personalized, or an email that starts with a hook that shows that you have done your research, right? Those are the ways that I have seen, and I've talked to my peers that are in purchasing decisions, and that is how people are capturing their attention these days. And even out of the box things like direct mail campaigns that are really fun and unique, that sort of thing is what is going to ultimately get you the win these days. Now, AI has its place. We have a tool internally that aggregates first party signals and signals from InFlu2, of course. We drink our own champagne. It aggregates those things, and we use AI to say, okay, take all of these activities that they've done to summarize what must be most important to them. And then we take that and we write an email ourselves, right? I think that it can be really helpful. But again, the mass blasting has just gotten to a point where only the really human activities are going to help you stand out today.
That's true. If you take your top 10, sales folks and you say, this is something that no training could ever teach someone, but this is something that they just have inherently, that they just have to learn with themselves. Like, you have the background of psychology from childhood. Like, you just are that person because of how you were brought up. What would you say is that one trait that you've seen with the top 10% that you've hired?
Yeah, I think it is knowing that the buyer's time matters more than your quota. And that is a very hard thing for a lot of reps to understand. And one of the mistakes that I see over and over with SDRs, BDRs throughout their careers is that they will push too hard for time when it is inappropriate in a way, and then they will push away the buyer forever versus just, hey, no worries, I know something's going on with your kid, they're not feeling well today, we'll cancel this meeting, I'll follow up with you in a few weeks, or a few days whenever they're feeling better. And instead of just hounding them for time, thinking more creatively and saying, okay, their kid is sick, why don't I, go out of my way to maybe send some chicken noodle soup to their house, right? As a meeting reminder, and say, hey, would love to reconnect whenever your kid is feeling better, whatever, right? So it's like taking that extra step to maintain the relationship versus only thinking about you and your quota. And ultimately, I think just like, again, it goes back to soft skills. I think everything that is hard to teach will fall back to a soft skill of something like empathy, listening, all of those things are pretty difficult. And as a leader, I can do my best to explain what goes wrong in certain situations and how we should have done those things better. But whenever I am hiring now, those are skills that I am looking for because they're very hard to find in a person, and they're hard to teach. So it's better to find someone up front that has those qualities and then teach them the operations later on.
I find it so interesting because as you're saying that, I have seen a lot of SDRs and BDRs send me emails that are so out of touch with reality because I can say that it is templated. And these are companies that are really good at sales. I've seen
Yeah.
sales leaders that are really good at their thought leadership posts. But yet, when I look at the kind of emails I get, it's really like you have not done any research on who I am. A simple Google search will tell you who this person is. If you can't find them, they're probably not the decision maker, of whatever it is you're selling me. So, why do you think that happens? Is it like because they have like the top 10 customers that you do this sort of, personalized, get to know them, really understand their family, their situation? Or is it because Like, you do this for everybody or do this for the top 10? What do you think the gap is there?
Yeah, I think most orgs, right, they will have generic sequencing. They have a quota. They want to have at least, 100, 200, 300 people going through sequences every day, right? So I think that it boils down to a workload issue. Now, what I don't understand about situations like that is, why wouldn't the leadership team create multiple sequences by persona so that it does feel at least relevant to you, right? It may not be personalized, but it will be relevant, whether it is a called out pain point that most people like you are facing, or, including relevant case studies to people like you, right? It should at least feel relevant if they are going to do, you know, sequencing at scale. And I do understand that sequencing at scale is necessary, right? You still have to have, you can have quality and both a certain level of quantity, but to maintain both, you need to have different messaging tracks for different personas at the very least. So I think that is the solve for that. I also think like baking manual steps into those sequences so that you are allowing for a bit of personalization and holding your SDRs accountable to doing that and giving them the AI tools, like I mentioned earlier, to help them do that quickly so that they're not spending 30 minutes on each email, right? We have everything we need for AI to be able to go pull those personalized, relevant facts. So I think it comes down to, why we're seeing that today still. I think it's simply a lack of understanding how AI can help optimize our outbound now in a way that is still scalable.
I think it's also like more interesting to me because I use AI a lot to do my own outreach because I do this podcast and I need to like reach out to people every day. But I believe in like using AI to really give me a list of people that qualify. But then at the same time, I need to go through each and every one of their LinkedIn profiles to see what they're talking about, what they're interested in. So that whenever I do the outreach to them, they feel like I know them and I'm not just reaching out to them because they have a certain title or work at a certain company. What I don't understand is, as one person running the whole podcast, why can't a big company with people that are specifically hired to do the certain thing, why can't they do that? What's the bottleneck there? Or is there like some sort of friction that's happening that I'm not seeing?
No, the good reps do it. That's the bottom line. The good reps do it. And, I think ultimately, you can make all the excuses in the world for it. Like they have high quotas, they have, thousands, tens of thousands of people in their own book of business. But I think that you'd find that the best reps are doing that and their quality is higher. Therefore, they are converting more. But I think some reps just get overwhelmed with the amount of people in their book of business that they start to send out generic emails. So it's absolutely I think it's a lack of understanding that more emails doesn't mean more conversions necessarily. And, people need to just understand that human touch is what is converting today. And so, unfortunately, I think it's more of a skill gap than anything else.
Also, I think when salespeople are given quotas to hit, they sort of like start focusing on the metrics of like, I've sent these many emails and I've had these many on the pipeline. Like they have these conversations. When they're talking like this, what about these metrics that makes you feel like this is not actually progressing the relationship the way you think it is?
Mm-hmm.
Just because they opened an email does not mean the relationship is progressing. What is the one metric that you've seen people often talk about, but it actually carries no meaning or weight to it at all?
Yeah. So a lot of people will talk about reply rate, but then they don't actually dive into what those replies were. And a lot of those replies can be negative. I also don't see a lot of people talking about opt out rate a lot. If you have a sequence with a high opt out rate, you're probably damaging the relationship versus helping it. And that's something to check in on all the time. Something that we're also looking at internally, and that I think more and more teams should start to look at internally, is how many manual steps were actually completed and, executed by the reps. and what is the quality of those manual steps. And obviously you can't see that in a dashboard. That requires deeper digging. It's harder, but you need to actually look at those manual emails and understand how your reps are filling in that relevant, personalized, information, and coach to that, right? So I think those are probably the biggest things. I also think like call sentiment is important in that same vein. Understanding, what were the objection reasons? What are we currently dealing with right now? So that we can come up with, as a leadership team, replies to these objections that will land well with these prospects.
It's very interesting. And I'm curious, how often do you think people do that? And also, why do you think they're not doing it right now? Like, what has been the friction all along to not have
Yeah.
implemented it already?
Yeah, I think like, your basic platforms will show you the overarching stats, right? The reply rate, the opt-in, opt-out rate, open rate, like the very basics. But I think leaders have taken that in the past at face value and said, okay, our reply rate here is 10%. That's an awesome reply rate. We're going to keep the sequence going, versus actually digging into those replies and clicking in and saying, okay, wait, 4 out of these 10 replies were not interested. It's not really a positive reply, so let's not count it as such. I think it's just not digging deeper. And again, we talk about AI and where it can be really, really useful. AI can start to do these deep dives for you and to understand, okay, cool, from that 10%, really 60% of those were positive or wanted more information. How can we, maybe adjust our messaging to, avoid that 40% that this message didn't resonate with? What were those personas? And is there another sequence that we could create for those personas specifically that would maybe land better? Right. And I think it's probably ends up being a bandwidth issue, because digging deeper into all the stats of all the sequences, right, that before AI required a lot of manual digging and work. And, SDR leaders nowadays are managing 10, 20 people, if not more. And so, time is, rare. But now with AI, we have the tools to be able to do that. And so hopefully more and more leaders start to do that and start to really understand the sentiment around these stats and be able to dive a bit deeper.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think with the if you see reply rates, or even when you take phone calls and people say no, or they're giving you a negative response, it's one of the hardest things to actually hear. I hate hearing no. I think nobody likes to hear no. As someone who reaches out to people every day, when people say no, I don't want to be on a podcast, it really just, it takes a hit personally, does. But you live, that's your career, that's what you do.
Mhm.
So in your experience, you obviously would have seen patterns of being like, people say no, not because of what I imagine it to be, but because most of the times it's really this reason. There's like an underlying reason behind it. Is there anything that you've seen common come out or stood out to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think getting a no with context can almost be just as valuable as getting a yes. And what I mean by that is, if you get a no and you are able to, ask the right questions to understand that, for example, it's a no because they have a competitor whose contract is up in 4 months. Great. Now I know exactly when to reach out to you. And if I play this correctly and we build a relationship, then I'll probably be on your short list when you go to reevaluate that competitor, right? So that, I think, in situations like that can be really helpful. Now, if it is a no because maybe you're too early stage for the adoption of a tool like mine, well, maybe I can give you some advice, based on other companies that I've seen that have grown from where you are to where my customers are today. And I can foster the relationship that way, right? I think sales is a long game relationship play, right? And so I think turning those no's into opportunities for relationship building and fostering can be really, really powerful. And that is what the best reps are doing today. They're not just waiting for the hand raisers to come and booking meetings with those people. They are building year-long relationships that come back to them when they're building shortlists or when they join a different company and all of a sudden need your solution. You are top of mind. And that is what, really I think drives the most successful salespeople today.
Yeah. And I barely think that those relationships are formed because you send the most perfect pitch or you send a volume of emails. It's mostly like one moment you met them at some event or you gave the right kind of response. I'm curious, like in your trajectory, what is like the one thing that has really stood out to you? Across companies, I've been able to hold on to this relationship because of like what would that be for you?
Gosh, yeah, I think like it's a combination of staying visible, right, to the network I've built. So, sharing on LinkedIn, commenting on their posts when they post and keeping that rapport that way. But then also making a point. I have an hour-long block every week to send out LinkedIn messages to old friends that I've met, that I haven't talked to in a while, checking in on people. I also make it a point to remember at least one thing about each person that I meet at a work conference or that I speak on a stage with, that sort of thing. I try to find out something about their personal life. So psychologically, we know that people like people that let them talk about themselves in a conversation. And so I always try to ask about, their family, their hobbies outside of work, what their, 5 to 9 looks like. And I get a ton of really great information. And I think that comes to me from my background in gifting, right? When we would go to events and talk to these people, we would want to get gift ideas to drop, gifts after the event and things like that. But it's still so valuable to do it even when gifting isn't the objective, because I can check in. There was a CRO, for example, and I learned that him and his wife were going to a Taylor Swift concert back when she was doing, the Eras tour. And I learned about it months before they went, right? But I kept it in mind. I threw it on my calendar so I knew exactly when they were going. And then months later, we hadn't talked in months, I pinged him the day after and said, "Hey, how was that Taylor Swift concert? I can't wait to hear all about it." And he was so impressed with just the timeliness of the message that I had remembered that now we have this inside joke forever. And I think that those things are so incredibly powerful because I know that if I message that guy, if I needed, someone to contribute to an article, someone to come talk to my team about the life of a CRO, anything like that, he would do it in a heartbeat, right? Because we built that human connection and he knows that I cared enough about him, care enough about him to care about the things that he cares about. And that goes beyond just him as a CRO that has the ability to buy my products, right? It goes to him as a human being. And I think that that's also a very important part of this. Like, we as humans want to be cared about beyond our ability to pay for a software. And so if you can show that to somebody and be believable and genuinely mean it, that will take you a very long way.
At the end of the day, I think it's all about being thoughtful, putting in the effort, and really considering this to be another relationship and not just something that's transactional. And I think that gets lost, really, really lost in the business world.
Absolutely.
Yeah. When you think about sales, let's say 50 years from now, someone's writing a book and they're looking at everything that we've done in sales and marketing. What do you think they will think about? I can't believe this is how they did sales and marketing. This is so wrong. What do you think would be that one thing that they talk about?
Yeah, I think like the generic spray and praise are going to be a thing of the past. Like, there is no reason with AI capabilities in a couple years and, with everything that is publicly accessible data and with all these signal tools that are out there today, there is no reason that anything hitting a prospect's inbox should be generic. So I think we're going to think that that was ridiculous. I think that's going to be the biggest thing. I think, sales in a few years is going to be really even more exaggeratedly all about relationships and, probably more in-person meetings, to continue relationships and, more events, more face-to-face human time, I think is what we are going to prioritize in the years to come, even more so than now.
Yeah, but also I think about whenever we have conversations that includes AI in it, which is almost every single second right now. But since we all have access to the same kind of intent, behavioral signals, and whatever, every single message is going to start sounding the same way. Hey, I noticed that you went to this event last month. I hope you had fun. Like, let's talk about this. Without AI would have sounded like I did my research, but right now I could just copy paste her entire LinkedIn, give to Claude and be like, find out something that stands out about her, and I'm going to send her a message. I might have not even noticed that you did certain things. So how do you think, I think that's going to be the next step of like, how do we differentiate between this person's actually put in the time to know me and this person's just doing their old, cold outreach?
Yeah, I mean, the reality is, right, that buyers are going to self-serve more than ever. So it's, for us to get a chance to sway their opinion and get on their short list is going to become smaller and smaller and smaller. And this kind of goes back to something that I said earlier, around how people capture my attention, my leadership friends' attention. And that is the things that AI cannot do, right? At least right now. I will say, like video messages and voice notes and, things like that. I've had people send me like Miro boards before of, how they could help me in the flow of what they could build. And, I think it's just all going to come down to creativity. I think less and less people are going to be answering the phone. I think less and less people are going to be answering emails. But I think if you can get FaceTime via video or even a voice note and differentiate yourself that way, you'll see more and more success that way. And we're seeing that trend on my team right now, that people are loving, the videos where they can actually see the person's face and things like that. So we'll see.
That's awesome. Yeah. Is there anything that you want to talk about that I didn't ask you?
My gosh, I mean, if you could tell me what sales is going to look like in 5 years, I think that'd be great. I think like ultimately, I think the only thing that I do know is that remaining human and authentic and, less transactional, building relationships, that I think will remain true. I think that will remain one of the strongest skills that salespeople can have, now and in 5 years from now.
Interesting and very true. I think we talk a lot about this, but then in action, it's really like maintaining a friendship and a romantic relationship. It really requires the same kind of effort.
Yeah.
And we just have to keep that in mind and not be like, it's just about this company and this one account. No, it's about maintaining the relationship wherever you go.
Right. And I think we'll see. And this is interesting. And I'm just like starting to think a little deeper now. But I think, today and in years past, people that, didn't necessarily have soft skills were able to survive in sales because there was a repeatable email process. They were able to, throw people into sequences and let them auto run and get some meetings, right? Because that's how email worked. People weren't getting absolutely slammed by N8N, Clay, all these automation tools then. But now, and in 5 years from now, I think that we will see those soft skills really becoming important for survival in this role. So it'll be interesting to see how it shakes out, but I think it's going to become more important than ever. And again, it's not something that's easily teachable. I think it's something that comes naturally from people and, something that is learned throughout their life growing up and, being raised and all of that. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how everything shakes out. But if I was a betting woman, that is where I would place my bet.
I think it's interesting because now more and more salespeople or sales leaders are going to say that, and people are going to start to think, okay, I need to ask better questions, which means I'm going to ask ChatGPT, tell me what questions to ask them. That's going to be the next trap, and people are going to fool themselves into thinking they know what kind of questions to ask because a few years later after that, they'll realize it's really difficult to ask the right questions because you don't always get the answers that you want. And then you're going to have to pivot and you're going to have to quickly think on your feet. And that is not something that you can learn. Like you said, it's really just has to be an inherent quality. And you have to be the annoying nerd kid when you're a child, in school and classroom. Hey, I don't understand what you mean by that. And you really just have to be that kid.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah. Austin, this was great. Honestly, I have never had a sales leader on the podcast before. This was awesome for me because I've had these questions in my mind for the longest time. So thank you so much for doing this.
Of course. Thank you for having me. This was so fun.